Hey there, this is Fatal Files. Today, I'm about to show you some of the dumbest clout-chasing influencers attempting some of the worst social media trends ever. From an influencer who let hundreds of strangers blindfold him to a streamer who was told to keep following the pin down a road abandoned for years, ending his streams permanently. It was December 9th, 2017, in a large public square in Lisbon. Tourists gathered to take photos, street vendors served customers, and people moved between the riverfront and nearby streets the way they usually did on a weekend evening. Among the crowd stood Thabo Kofi Mensah, 27. He had left Accra 4 years earlier with very little money and only basic Portuguese, finding work on the night shift cleaning office buildings in the city center. He worked from 11 at night until 6 in the morning, usually alone, except for a security guard who sometimes left him a cup of coffee. Thabo was quiet and reserved, often feeling self-conscious about his accent whenever he spoke with strangers. That quiet personality eventually became his career. 2.5 years before this night, he uploaded a video of himself standing blindfolded in the same square with a sign inviting strangers to harmlessly prank him while he remained completely still and refused to react. The video earned more money than he normally made in a month of cleaning offices. Soon afterward, he left his job and continued making the same type of content, believing that staying completely calm was what kept people watching. By late 2017, the pranks had become more aggressive. Viewers had gone from placing hats on his head to covering him with shaving cream, pouring ice water over him, and drawing on his face with markers. It's honestly hard to watch knowing what happened later, but Thabo never seemed to believe the situation had become truly dangerous. Friends encouraged him to set simple ground rules for participants, but he worried that adding restrictions would make the videos feel less authentic. To celebrate the channel's 2.5-year anniversary, he announced a live stream with no planned ending, returning to the same public square where the series had begun. He expected a bigger audience than usual, but underestimated how many people would actually show up. It is baffling how someone can invite hundreds of people to a public space without having even a basic plan for safety. His previous live streams had attracted small crowds that never disrupted the area, so he did not coordinate with city authorities or arrange any form of crowd management. By 8 that evening, the audience had grown larger than anything he had experienced before. Spectators gradually spread beyond the pedestrian space and onto the edge of a nearby street that remained open to traffic. No barriers separated the crowd from the roadway, and no one was directing where people should stand. By 9, people were packed 3 rows deep around him with their phones raised. Earlier in the stream, several participants had already tried increasingly dramatic pranks to entertain the audience. Hoping to top them, a young man approached from behind and shoved Thabo hard with both hands. Blindfolded and unable to see what was happening, Thabo stumbled backward several steps, trying to regain his balance. It's gut-wrenching to think that a single thoughtless moment could ruin so many lives. His heel slipped off the curb before he realized he had reached the roadway. At that same moment, a delivery van traveling at about 12 miles an hour was making a slow turn around pedestrians near the intersection. The driver had almost no time to react before Thabo fell backward into the vehicle's path. Security cameras from nearby businesses and the van's dashcam recorded the incident, which investigators later reviewed. Witnesses said several people continued filming for a few seconds before anyone realized how serious the situation had become. The fact that people kept recording instead of helping really makes you wonder about the mindset of a crowd fueled by social media. A woman near the front called emergency services and paramedics came. However, Thabo was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner concluded that Thabo died from blunt force injuries to his head and chest caused by the collision with the van and the impact with the ground. He never had a chance to see the vehicle or protect himself before the collision. Toxicology tests found no drugs or alcohol in his system. The medical examiner classified the death as accidental, while police investigated the person who shoved him and later concluded there was insufficient evidence that he intended to cause fatal harm. Legal definitions aside, it's a tragedy that feels like a wake-up call for how we treat each other when we're caught up in the digital noise. Several months later, the city updated its public event guidance, requiring organizers expecting larger public gatherings to notify local authorities in advance so crowd safety measures could be considered. Thabo's family in Accra could not afford the cost of bringing his body home, but within a day, viewers from his channel raised enough money to cover the expenses. It was September 14th, 2017, inside a geothermal basin in Yellowstone National Park, Wyoming. The boardwalk wound through a field of steaming ground and bright mineral pools. Visitors paused along the railings to photograph the colored water while thin clouds of steam drifted across the walkway. That afternoon, Logan Pierce, 28, arrived carrying a tripod, a camera, and a small action camera mounted on a telescoping pole. He had started a modest outdoor channel with about 4,000 subscribers only a few months earlier, shortly after ending a 6-year relationship. The two had built their lives around seasonal work across the western states, rafting in summer, ski lifts in winter, campground jobs in between. When the relationship ended, Logan found himself traveling alone. Filming trips through national parks became a way to stay occupied during long drives and quiet nights at campsites. On September 14th, he stopped along a boardwalk beside a steaming blue pool surrounded by pale mineral crust inside the geothermal basin. Visitors moved along the wooden walkway while thin clouds of steam drifted across the ground. Rangers regularly warned that the crust surrounding geothermal pools could collapse without warning. Beneath the pale mineral surface, boiling water often flowed through hidden channels. Logan positioned the tripod on the boardwalk and began filming a segment explaining how geothermal features worked and why visitors were required to remain on the walkway. To capture a closer view of the mineral surface, he extended the action camera on the telescoping pole over the railing. The pale crust appeared dry and solid from above. Small bubbles occasionally disturbed the bright blue water several feet away. Steam drifted across the basin as Logan leaned forward to adjust the camera angle. While steadying himself, his boot briefly pressed against the mineral surface just outside the railing. Visitors sometimes made similar balancing movements without realizing the crust could be fragile only inches beyond the walkway. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, the surface beneath his foot cracked open. The crust collapsed in a narrow opening, and Logan's leg dropped straight through into a channel of scalding runoff water flowing beneath the mineral layer. Steam burst upward as he tried pulling himself backward. The crust around the opening began breaking apart while he struggled. Boiling water soaked through his pant leg within seconds. Witnesses later said he managed to twist his body and fall backward onto the boardwalk, pulling his leg free while steam continued venting from the hole beside the railing. Two nearby visitors rushed forward and dragged him farther away from the edge while others called park rangers. Logan remained conscious but was shaking and unable to stand. The lower portion of his pant leg had burned away where the water soaked through. Skin along his lower leg had already begun blistering from the extreme heat. Rangers arrived roughly 8 minutes after the emergency call. They secured the area and began first aid while staff prepared a helicopter landing zone nearby. About 30 minutes later, a rescue helicopter transported Logan to a regional hospital. Doctors treated Logan for extensive thermal injuries across much of his lower body. Water in geothermal runoff channels can exceed 200 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to destroy tissue within seconds. Despite emergency treatment, his condition worsened from severe fluid loss and shock. He died later that evening. The medical examiner documented third-degree burns across more than half of his lower body. Investigators determined the collapse occurred where his boot had briefly pressed against the thin mineral crust just inches beyond the boardwalk rail. Beneath that fragile layer, a channel of near-boiling water had been flowing unseen. The death was ruled an accidental geothermal burn caused by crust failure outside the designated walkway. During the investigation, park authorities reviewed Logan's phone and travel notes. Among the recent drafts was a short message written earlier that day to his former partner, describing how strange Yellowstone's geothermal basins felt, and remarking that if something ever happened to him while traveling, it would probably be in a place like that. It was a Saturday morning in late October 2017 in a small town on the outskirts of Tucson, Arizona. The air was dry, the range was open, and by mid-morning, everything had already gone wrong. Marcy Delvo was 41 years old and lived alone in a single-story home about 2 miles from the gun range that had been her personal enemy for the better part of a year. On top of her part-time work, Marcy ran a local advocacy YouTube channel she had started in early 2016. It was not large, a few hundred subscribers, but it was consistent, She posted videos documenting what she called community negligence, usually targeting local businesses or services she believed were operating without accountability. The gun range had already appeared in 2 of her uploads before that morning, both framing it as a noise hazard that local channels had failed to address. But Marcy had a particular quality that the people around her knew well. She did not let things go. A noise complaint that most people would file once and forget about was, for Marcy, the beginning of a campaign. She had contacted the range ownership multiple times over the course of several months. None of it produced the result she wanted, which was the range shutting down, or, at a minimum, limiting its hours significantly. What I find interesting about Marcy is that she was not entirely wrong about the noise. People who lived near that range had complained before. The difference was that everyone else eventually moved on. Marcy never did. By late 2017, she had convinced herself that showing up in person was the only way anyone would take her seriously. That belief, more than anything else, is what put her there. That morning, she arrived at the range just before 10. It was a Saturday, which meant the place was active. Several shooters were already on the lanes, bags down, running through their sessions. Marcy walked past the entry signage without stopping and made her way toward the main area where the range owner was speaking with a group near the far end. She was not there to listen. She had already decided how the conversation was going to go. The argument that followed was loud enough that multiple people on the range stopped what they were doing. Witnesses later described her as agitated from the moment she arrived, pointing toward the surrounding neighborhood and raising her voice steadily as the owner tried to respond. It went on for several minutes with neither side getting anywhere. That kind of standoff, where the other person just will not hear you, reminds me of something I talked about in an earlier episode. That specific dynamic where someone walks in with a conclusion already formed and treats the conversation as a formality. You cannot reason with that. You can only wait for it to end. What happened next took only a few seconds. At some point during the confrontation, Marcy turned toward a nearby bench where a shooter had set down his range bag between sessions. The bag was unzipped. She reached into it. Witnesses said it looked deliberate, like she was trying to pull the firearm out to make a point about how carelessly weapons were handled on the property. The shooter, whose bag it was, had stepped back from the bench and was standing a few feet away. Nobody had time to react. The firearm was chambered. The moment her grip tightened and her finger slipped inside the trigger guard and pressed the trigger as she pulled it free, it discharged. The shot entered her upper right abdomen. She went down immediately. I think about that a lot. The shooter was right there. The bag was right there. Not a single person in that space expected her to reach in. That is the thing about someone who is fully committed to making a point. They stop calculating risk entirely. Other shooters moved toward her. There was nothing that could be done at that point. Marcy Delvo was pronounced dead later that afternoon. The cause was a single gunshot wound to the upper abdomen, resulting in fatal damage to her liver and the vessels surrounding it. Blood loss was the determining factor. The manner of death was ruled accidental. The shooter faced no charges, given that he had not been in contact with the firearm at the moment it discharged. The range remained open. The case was closed. It was August 21st, 2017, in Savannah, Georgia, a public plaza in the historic district where tourists usually stop for photos and locals pass through on their way to nearby shops. Dana Cutler was 26. She worked freelance in graphic design, and most of her time outside work went into creating lifestyle content online. Simple clips, aesthetic locations, everyday moments made to look effortless once they were on camera. She had a familiar approach to filming. Find a location that looked visually appealing, set the phone up somewhere stable enough, get the shot, then move on. Nothing complicated. If it framed well, she usually didn't question the setup too much. Later that afternoon, she arrived at the plaza while it was still active. People were moving through the open walkways, sitting on benches, and stopping here and there for photos. The whole space is designed to be visually appealing from almost any angle, which is part of why it attracts so much casual filming. Right in the center of the plaza was a decorative swing, not a real one, a visual feature, basically a prop. The hardware was original, never replaced, and enough tourists had messed around with it over the years that the fittings were already halfway loose. And what did she do? Sat right down and started filming. She set her phone on a small tripod a few feet away and adjusted the framing. Just a quick clip, nothing out of the ordinary for her. At first, everything seemed fine. She started filming and gently rocked back and forth to create movement in the shot. A few people nearby noticed but didn't react much. It just looked like someone using a popular photo spot the way it was often used. The swing was supported by overhead steel cable anchors attached to a decorative frame above the walkway. It wasn't designed for sustained forward and back motion under full body weight. With repeated movement, small amounts of stress began transferring through the same connection points each time the swing shifted. The first few seconds of footage weren't good enough for her. Too static. So she started pumping her legs, getting actual momentum going, not just a gentle rock, full swinging motion. She'd done it at other spots before, and it always looked better on camera. She continued adjusting the movement to get the shot she wanted, without considering how the structure was supported. For a brief moment, there was a small change in balance, a slight shift that might have felt like normal movement. She adjusted her posture without really thinking about it and kept filming. Then, the structure gave way. The upper connection lost stability. The swing dropped unevenly, and she fell forward into the supporting frame before hitting the ground beneath it. The tripod continued recording for a few seconds, but she moved out of frame almost immediately. People nearby reacted within seconds. Some stood from benches, others moved closer, and a few stepped back while calling for help. The atmosphere shifted quickly from normal public activity to confusion once it became clear this wasn't part of a stage setup. Staff from nearby businesses arrived quickly and helped move her away from the structure while emergency services were called. The response was overlapping and uncoordinated, some guiding her out of the swing area, others trying to manage the crowd, and others calling for assistance at the same time. She was conscious at first, but clearly in severe pain, and her condition worsened as time passed. Emergency services arrived shortly after and transported her to a nearby medical facility. She had sustained severe injuries from the fall, including head trauma and internal injuries caused by the impact. She was pronounced dead later that day. A later review of the installation noted that the swing was intended as a decorative public art feature rather than a load-bearing structure designed for repeated motion. Over time, repeated use had placed stress on the upper cable fittings, contributing to gradual loosening that went unnoticed during everyday public activity. There were no restrictions in place preventing interaction, despite the structure not being designed for sustained use. The recording on her phone stopped shortly after the incident began, with earlier footage from the same session, later reviewed during assessment. The incident was classified as an accidental death caused by structural failure during use of a decorative installation beyond its intended design. It was March 3, 2015 in Phoenix, Arizona. Despite the city's dry climate where rust forms slowly, years of irrigation runoff leaking onto the billboard's joints had caused unusually severe localized corrosion. At the bottom, there was a sign that said, "No climbing was allowed." Simon West was 30 years old and made videos of himself climbing things: towers, rooftops, construction frames, anything high up. He had a following that watched for the thrill of it, but another creator had just posted a climb of a taller structure, and Simon felt it. That kind of competition hits differently when your whole identity is built around being the one who goes highest. His goal that day was simple: get higher, get the shot, get it out before the moment passed. Nate Collins, 28, was with him on the ground operating a drone to film the climb from the air. Honestly, I get it. Someone uploads a higher climb, and suddenly what you did starts to feel small, and then you start to feel afraid of what might happen next. Before Simon even started going up, the condition of the structure was easy to see. The metal was discolored in patches where rust had been spreading. Some of the bolts holding sections together had corroded badly enough that the damage was visible from the ground. The billboard had also been through recent high winds, and there were stress marks along the joints and slight bends in some of the supports. Simon could see all of this. Nate noticed it too. They went ahead anyway. I've seen this mindset before, thinking a problem applies to everyone but you. What I don't get is Nate saw exactly what Simon saw and still chose to launch the drone. Simon climbed up to the walkway near the top without any immediate problems. The structure held his weight on the way up. He stepped out onto a narrow beam that ran beneath the billboard, the kind of position that would give the drone camera a clean shot of him with the city behind him. He shifted his weight to the side to line up the angle. One bolt gave way first. It didn't make a dramatic sound. Bolts weakened by rust don't always snap loudly. The beam dropped slightly on one side. Simon felt it and tried to shift his weight back to rebalance himself. That adjustment put more stress on the bolts sitting right next to the one that had already failed. They gave way too. The beam dropped further. Simon grabbed for an upright pole running along the side of the structure. For a second, he had something to hold. Then, the metal plate connecting that pole to the rest of the frame tore free. It had been holding on through rust and pressure alone, and it couldn't take the sudden load. That whole section came down. Simon fell about 60 feet. On the way down, he hit a crossbar, a horizontal metal beam at roughly mid-height. That impact alone was severe. He then hit the ground. Nate, watching from below through his drone feed, saw it happen. There was no movement after Simon landed. I don't think there's a version of that fall where the outcome is different. Once that first bolt failed and the rebalancing attempt put more pressure on everything around it, the rest followed quickly. There was no stopping it. Emergency services arrived at the scene. Simon was pronounced dead where he had landed. The combination of the mid-fall impact and the ground impact caused injuries that were not survivable. Structural inspectors went over the billboard afterward. The bolts had been corroding for a long time. Not just surface rust, but deep enough that they had lost most of their holding strength. The recent storm had added stress to joints that were already weak. To me, that's the part that stands out. The structure didn't fail because Simon was unlucky. It failed because it was already broken and nobody had fixed it, but the risk wasn't hidden. Simon had seen the corrosion, the stress damage, and the warning sign, and still chose to climb. The billboard was later removed and inspected after the incident, with officials citing long-term structural neglect compounded by unauthorized access. It was March 4th, 2021 in Modesto, California. The evening temperature had dropped into the low 60s as businesses prepared to close for the day. Traffic moved steadily while employees locked storefronts and finished their last transactions before heading home. Behind one of those counters stood Aldous Marlowe, 27, who helped run his family's small jewelry store. During slower afternoons, he'd go live on Facebook for a few hundred regular viewers. The streams were actually simple. He'd showcase new gold chains, bracelets, rings, explain the difference between solid gold and gold-plated jewelry, answer questions about pricing, and occasionally sell pieces directly to viewers who contacted the store afterward. The streams gradually built a loyal audience. Many viewers tuned in several times a week, asking about prices, requesting close-up looks at new arrivals, or simply chatting while Aldous organized display cases. Since most of the viewers were repeat customers, he started treating them more like friends than strangers. Over time, Aldous became comfortable sharing small details about the business. Viewers learned which days new deliveries arrived, when the shop was busiest, and that he usually stayed behind after closing to balance receipts and lock the gold back into the safe. Looking back, it's unsettling how much information people can give away without realizing it. A few days earlier, someone in the live stream joked that regular viewers probably knew the store layout as well as Aldous did. Aldous laughed it off, saying anyone who watched often probably knew the store layout by now. To him, it was just harmless banter, but one viewer was paying much closer attention. It makes you realize how dangerous that digital intimacy can be. We treat streamers like friends, but we forget that behind the screen, there could be anyone lurking in the shadows of the chat. Later that evening, Aldous went live as usual, showing off a few new arrivals while chatting with his regular viewers as the store slowly emptied before closing. As he prepared to lock up, a viewer commented that they were outside and wanted to buy several gold chains before the shop closed. They challenged him to unlock the door for one last sale, promising it would be worth his time. Thinking it was just another customer, Aldous agreed and unlocked the door. The moment it swung open, the man's friendly act disappeared. He pulled a handgun and demanded the gold. Aldous tried to comply, opening a display case before heading toward the back office for the safe. When he struggled to unlock it, the robber pistol whipped him. A desperate struggle broke out, and in the chaos, the gun discharged. A single bullet struck Aldous in the chest. The robber grabbed several trays of jewelry and fled. A neighboring business owner reported hearing a loud bang, followed by a cry for help. Officers were on the scene within minutes, finding Aldous critically wounded behind the counter. He was rushed to the hospital, but he passed away during emergency surgery. It's devastating to think that his commitment to being authentic and open with his audience is exactly what ended up painting a target on his back. The coroner ruled it a homicide. Detectives eventually cracked the case using surveillance, DNA evidence, and phone records. Under questioning, the suspect admitted he had been watching Aldous's live streams for weeks. Aldous's family kept the business running, but they shut down the live streams for good. Other jewelers in the area followed suit, ending their own online sales and hiding their shop layouts and security measures. They all agreed Aldous's death didn't just end a career, it killed the sense of security that had defined their industry forever. It was March 19, 2016. The gravel lot behind several industrial warehouses on the outskirts of Calgary was growing dark. Most workers had already gone home, and as daylight faded, judging distances across the open lot became much harder. Callum Nathaniel Breton was 25 years old. He wasn't a trained stunt performer or filmmaker. He had taught himself how to shoot videos through trial and error with 3 close friends and a drone. I've still found it surprising how quickly people convince themselves that enough practice can replace professional safety planning. His goal was to create videos that looked like one continuous shot, leaving viewers wondering how everything happened without a single cut. For his channel's first anniversary, Callum planned his most ambitious transition yet. The idea was to jump from a trampoline onto the roof of a slowly moving SUV, then leap into the bed of a pickup truck driving a short distance ahead. The vehicles would travel at low speed across the empty lot, while the drone captured the entire sequence in one uninterrupted take. It sounded manageable after several successful rehearsals, but every part of the stunt depended on precise timing and consistent spacing between the vehicles. Over 2 days, the group completed several practice runs. During every rehearsal, thick crash mats filled the truck bed, and one friend focused solely on monitoring the distance between the 2 vehicles using hand signals. The rehearsals went smoothly. When Callum reviewed the footage afterward, though, he became frustrated that the bright-colored crash mats were clearly visible from the drone. I felt they ruined the illusion that the stunt was happening naturally. Against his friend's advice, he decided the final take would be filmed without the mats. The spotter also moved out of position, so the truck bed would remain completely clear for the camera, leaving no one responsible for continuously monitoring the gap between the vehicles. Looking back, removing both layers of protection turned a controlled stunt into something far less predictable. By the time they prepared for the final attempt, daylight was fading quickly. Visibility across the lot wasn't poor enough to stop driving, but it was becoming harder to judge exact distances between moving vehicles. Without the spotter providing constant corrections, the drivers relied entirely on their own judgment to maintain the planned spacing. Doesn't seem like much, but even a small change in distance can completely alter a jump like this. When everyone signaled they were ready, the SUV and pickup accelerated to the same planned speed. Callum bounced from the trampoline onto the SUV's roof, slipped briefly on the metal surface, then recovered his balance. He immediately turned toward the pickup ahead and prepared for the second jump. As he pushed off, the spacing between the vehicles was no longer what they had practiced. The pickup had gradually moved farther ahead by only a few feet, enough to make the jump impossible. Callum reached the end of his leap before realizing he would come up short. He struck the top edge of the tailgate with his hip and ribs before falling into the gap between the vehicles. The SUV driver braked immediately, but there wasn't enough time to avoid him. The front tire struck Callum before the vehicle came to a stop. The drone continued recording overhead until one of his friends ran over and shut off the equipment. It's difficult to imagine how quickly a carefully planned stunt can fall apart once a single measurement changes. Someone called emergency services almost immediately. Paramedics arrived about 18 minutes later and found Callum critically injured. He was airlifted to a trauma center but never regained consciousness. He died 2 days later. The medical examiner determined that Callum died from a catastrophic traumatic brain injury and extensive internal injuries caused by the combined impacts. Investigators found that the group had removed the crash mats before the final take and confirmed that no commercial stunt coordinator or formal safety plan had been involved, because everyone involved had voluntarily participated, and investigators found no evidence of criminal negligence beyond poor judgment. No criminal charges were filed. The case was later referenced in safety discussions about independently produced stunt videos and the importance of maintaining protective equipment during filming. I think what stays with me about Callum's story is that nothing failed except the decision-making. Aesthetics became more important than safety, and that single choice changed everything. Our next creator made a similar mistake, except the danger wasn't moving across the ground. It was wading beneath the water. It was April 22, 2018. Along a narrow stretch of canal in Dearborn, Michigan, the water moved slowly beneath a concrete pedestrian bridge. A young man prepared equipment beside the riverbank while cyclists passed overhead as the quiet canal moved steadily beneath the concrete span. Earlier that morning, Derek Rojas, 27, arrived carrying a tripod, gloves, rope, and several heavy neodymium magnets used for magnet fishing. What began as a hobby had gradually turned into a small side hustle. The scrap metal he pulled from rivers, old tools, pipes, bicycle frames, could be taken to a recycling yard for a few dollars. Derek worked weekdays detailing cars at a repair shop, but the pay rarely covered everything. On weekends, he walked canals and riverbanks searching for metal worth recovering. Most finds were worthless scrap, but occasionally a heavier piece meant a little extra gas money. His small YouTube channel, followed by about 5,000 subscribers, documented the searches. Viewers watched for the chance that something unusual might surface. That afternoon, he chose a deeper section of canal beside the pedestrian bridge where decades of discarded metal had settled along the bottom. Derek set the tripod facing the canal before lowering the magnet into the water. Nearby warning signs cautioned about hazardous debris in the canal, but he continued anyway. Pedestrians crossed the bridge above him, and a man walking a dog paused nearby as Derek began dragging the magnet slowly along the canal floor before pulling it back up. The first few pulls brought up bolts and small pieces of scrap metal. Each time he dropped the magnet again, hoping for something heavier. On the sixth pull, the rope suddenly went tight. Derek leaned back and planted his boots against the concrete edge. Whatever was attached below felt heavier than the earlier finds. He hauled steadily until a tangled mass broke the surface. Rust-coated wire and twisted metal fragments clung tightly to the magnet. He pulled the bundle onto the edge of the concrete bank and crouched beside it, trying to separate the pieces from the magnet's powerful pull. The metal scraps were tightly knotted together. Each attempt to free them required him to pull the tangled bundle against the magnet's surface. The man with the dog later told investigators Derek seemed focused on untangling the debris so he could show it to the camera. While gripping the wire bundle with both hands, Derek leaned closer to see where the pieces were caught. The tension in the twisted scrap suddenly released. The metal shifted sharply in his hands, and Derek recoiled with a shout. He stumbled backward several steps before collapsing onto the concrete path beside the canal. The debris bundle fell beside him. The nearby pedestrian ran toward him, while two cyclists stopped on the bridge and shouted down. One of them called emergency services, while others kept people back. Blood was visible around Derek's face as he lay on the ground, barely moving. Witnesses said his breathing quickly became shallow and irregular. Paramedics arrived several minutes after the emergency call. They assessed the injury and attempted life-saving measures, but Derek showed no meaningful neurological response. He was pronounced dead at the scene. During the investigation, responders examined the debris Derek had pulled from the canal. Inside the tangled scrap, they found a long, rusted construction nail lodged through loops of twisted wire. Investigators determined that when the debris shifted under tension, the rigid nail rotated outward from the tangle just as Derek leaned over the bundle. The point entered through his eye socket and penetrated the brain. The medical examiner confirmed the cause of death as traumatic brain injury resulting from penetration through the orbital cavity. Within magnet fishing communities, the incident later circulated as a cautionary example. Authorities reminded hobby magnet fishers to treat recovered metal as hazardous and avoid leaning over tangled debris while separating it from powerful magnets. It was a Sunday afternoon in late August 2016 on the outskirts of Reno, Nevada. The sky was clear, the wind conditions were good, and the drop zone was running its regular weekend schedule when Claudia Volser walked in and decided she had a problem with the way things were being run. Claudia Volser was 39 years old and lived in a mid-sized apartment complex in central Reno. She had built a consumer accountability blog alongside her warehouse career, centered on exposing what she called predatory business practices in the Reno area. It had a loyal readership that engaged regularly with her warnings and recommendations. She had posted about the drop zone twice before that Sunday, once questioning its pricing structure and once suggesting its safety protocols were theater designed to justify charging more. She had come to the drop zone that afternoon with a coworker who had a tandem jump booked. Claudia had no booking, no experience, and no prior exposure to skydiving in any formal capacity. She was there as a spectator. That lasted about 20 minutes. What appears to have irritated her first was the length of the pre-jump instruction her coworker was receiving. She watched the lead instructor walk through the safety briefing and equipment orientation and made it known to the people around her that the whole process was being drawn out unnecessarily. When the instructor moved into the equipment demonstration, she approached him directly and told him he was overcomplicating something that was not that complicated. The instructor redirected her and continued. Claudia did not let it go. The argument that followed was witnessed by several people in the staging area. Other jumpers, staff members, and a small group of spectators near the hangar. Witnesses described her as escalating steadily, telling the instructor that his job was not as technical as he was making it out to be, and that the entire operation was designed to extract money from people by making them feel like they needed more preparation than they actually did. The instructor eventually walked away from the conversation entirely. That is when Claudia turned her attention to a younger staff member who had been standing nearby. That shift from the person who would not give her what she wanted to the one who might is something I have seen in almost every story on this channel where someone talks their way into something fatal. The lead instructor had held his ground. The younger staff member was newer, less certain, and had just watched a confrontation he was not equipped to navigate. Claudia told him she had completed AFF training at another drop zone. She had not, and that she just needed to be cleared for a solo jump. The staff member, assuming prior certification and failing to verify it through the system, relented. What should have followed was a complete equipment inspection, a solo jump assessment, an altitude and body position briefing, and a review of both primary and reserve deployment procedures. None of that happened. Claudia was issued a parachute rig that had been repacked earlier that week by a junior rigger. The required inspection and sign-off from a certified senior rigger had not yet been completed, a lapse that should have grounded the equipment. Claudia put the rig on with minimal oversight, was cleared through manifest without her credentials being properly verified, boarded the jump aircraft with a group of experienced jumpers, and said nothing to anyone about her actual experience level. Every checkpoint she skipped was a decision, not an oversight. She exited the aircraft at approximately 10,000 feet. The primary parachute deployed, but entered a line twist configuration that significantly reduced its ability to slow her descent. That kind of malfunction has a practiced response that experienced jumpers train for repeatedly. Claudia had no training. The reserve parachute, her last option, did not deploy correctly, a failure that the subsequent review linked directly to the improper repack. Several people on the ground witnessed the descent and the impact. Staff reached her within moments. There was nothing to be done. The formal review that followed reconstructed the full sequence. The junior staff member who granted her access without verification, the uncertified repack that had never been signed off by a senior rigger, and Claudia's own decision to misrepresent her experience level and walk past every checkpoint the facility had in place. Investigators noted that while multiple failures had contributed, the chain began the moment Claudia lied to someone who was not in a position to push back. She was pronounced dead at the scene from traumatic injuries sustained on impact. The junior staff member faced professional consequences, and the manner of death was ruled accidental. It was March 28, 2016 in Portland, Oregon, a small independent cafe in a walkable neighborhood where weekend mornings usually meant steady foot traffic, low conversation, and the constant sound of machines running behind the counter. Jillian Wick was 22. She was a college student and spent most of her free time outside classes creating lifestyle content online. Her posts were simple: cafe visits, daily routines, short clips meant to look casual and unplanned, even when there was usually a bit more intention behind them than it seemed. She had a habit of filming hands-free. Most of the time, she'd place her phone on whatever surface was nearby and let it record while she moved through the moment. A table, a shelf, the edge of a counter, whatever gave her a usable angle. Stability wasn't something she thought too much about if the framing looked fine on screen. If it looked good on camera, that was the whole checklist. That day, she arrived at the cafe late in the morning. It was already moderately busy. People were seated near the windows, a few standing in line at the counter, and there was that constant mix of cups, conversation, and movement behind the bar. Staff were moving between stations, calling out orders, and handling drinks during a typical rush period. She ordered a drink and shifted closer to the service counter so she could film a short clip while it was being prepared. Nothing about it felt unusual to her. It was the kind of setup she had done before in different places, just trying to capture a quick moment for content. She placed her phone on the edge of the counter, angled toward herself and the preparation area behind the register. It was slightly overhanging, not secured in any way. There wasn't anything unusual about the placement in her mind, just enough to get the framing she wanted. Around her, the counter area was active. Staff were moving between machines, customers were being served, and there was constant motion in and out of the workspace. Nothing chaotic, but enough activity that the space was never fully still. While waiting, she leaned in slightly to check the framing. The phone shifted under the angle, wobbled for a second, and slipped off the edge of the counter. It didn't just fall cleanly into open space. It slid and dropped into the back prep area where customers weren't meant to step in. For a moment, she just looked at it. Staff were nearby but busy, and asking for help meant waiting in the middle of a rush. The decision came quickly. She didn't wait. Instead, she leaned over the counter to reach it herself. No call out, no step back, just a quick movement forward into the staff area. She crossed the boundary of the counter and extended her upper body into a tight workspace filled with equipment, trays, and movement from multiple directions. For a phone. She crossed into an active kitchen workspace. For a phone. As she reached forward, her arm made contact with a large stainless steel coffee urn positioned close to the edge of the prep area. It had been set there temporarily during the rush, close to the edge and not fully secured. The contact didn't immediately topple it. The urn shifted at its base, already unstable from its placement, sliding slightly before losing balance. Once it shifted far enough, the weight distribution changed and it tipped forward. Hot coffee spilled across the counter space in a sudden release, pouring over her upper body in a large volume before she could fully pull back. The reaction around her was immediate but uncoordinated. Staff moved in quickly, some guiding her away from the counter, while others called for emergency help and reached for water at the same time. Customers turned toward the noise as the situation shifted from routine service to confusion in seconds. She stepped back from the counter, visibly in pain. Someone helped guide her into a seated position while cool water was applied as quickly as possible. She was conscious but in severe distress and remained there while staff stayed with her until emergency services arrived. She was transported to a nearby medical facility with extensive burn injuries covering a significant portion of her upper body. Her condition deteriorated over the following days despite treatment, and she was pronounced dead 2 days later from complications related to those injuries. The incident was reviewed and classified as an accidental injury resulting from a chain of events during routine activity in a public service environment. It was October 14, 2018, in a quiet neighborhood in suburban Ohio. One house on the street stood apart from the rest. The windows were boarded up and yellow crime scene tape was still stretched across the front porch. No officers were around. Their presence had already been withdrawn hours earlier after evidence processing concluded. Elijah Coyle was 27 years old and ran his own online channel where he posted videos about things he said the public wasn't being told. He had a following that liked his no-filter style. He'd gotten warnings from police before for going into places he wasn't supposed to be. To him, that was almost part of the content. That day, he believed the investigation at this house had been wrapped up too fast. He thought they missed something big, and he wanted to be the guy who caught it on camera. I can sense that for Elijah, it wasn't just about finding the truth. It was about proving the official story wrong. He knew if he caught something investigators left behind, he'd be trending overnight. Emil Hale, his 29-year-old camera operator, came with him. Emil was more careful by nature, but he usually went along with what Elijah decided. Monitoring the live stream from a car parked nearby was Dana Ruiz, 25, their editor. She was watching everything in real time through her laptop. When they arrived, Elijah filmed the tape and the boarded up front of the house. He explained to his audience why he thought the police had moved too quickly. Then, he found a window on the side of the house. It already had damage. The frame was cracked, the board over it was loose. He used that to push his way inside. Emil followed. Once they were in, Elijah moved through the house slowly, narrating as he went. He touched door frames, ran his fingers along counters, pointed the camera at areas he claimed were important. Fingerprint smudges were being left on surfaces that investigators had already processed. He didn't seem to think about that. About 12 minutes into the live stream, the back door opened. The door had a damaged latch from an earlier forced entry, allowing it to open without resistance. An adult man stepped inside. He was carrying a backpack and stopped the moment he realized something was wrong. He scanned the room carefully, then began moving forward. I think the moment that man walked in, everything that was going to happen next was already set in motion. Emil felt it immediately. He whispered to Elijah that they needed to leave and began slowly backing toward the front of the house. Elijah didn't move. He lowered his voice, but kept the camera up and kept filming. The hallway between them and the back door was narrow, barely enough for two people to pass side by side. Emil tried to get around Elijah to reach the front exit, but Elijah's position and the camera equipment blocked the path. The man told them to leave. Elijah took a step toward him instead, raising the camera higher. The man gave Elijah a chance to walk away, but he didn't take it. What happens next will make him regret that decision. By that point, the distance between Elijah and the man had closed to less than 3 feet. The attack happened in a sudden, deliberate motion. The man stepped in close and drove a knife upward into Elijah's abdomen, the blade thrusting in below the ribs with force. Elijah's body jerked from the impact as he was physically pushed back into the shelf behind him, knocking items loose as they crashed down around him. Emil lunged forward to grab him, but Elijah was already folding under the shock of being stabbed. Before there was time to react, the man struck again, driving the knife into the side of Elijah's neck. The wound severed major blood vessels, and the blood loss was immediate. Elijah's body and the fallen debris partially blocked the front exit. Emil squeezed past and escaped while the camera stayed live on the floor. Dana heard the confrontation through the stream. She called the police and emergency services right away. Responders arrived at the scene, but by the time they reached Elijah, he was already gone. He was pronounced dead at the house from the 2 penetrating injuries, one to the abdomen, one to the neck. The man who entered the house was later identified as someone connected to the original case that had brought investigators there in the first place. He had returned to retrieve something he had hidden before the investigation began. Responding officers moved through the house and secured the scene. The man attempted to leave through the back of the property after the attack, but didn't get far. Officers located him a short distance away and detained him without further incident. He was taken into custody. Investigators documented what the unauthorized entry had done to the scene. Emil and Dana were not immediately charged, but the possibility of charges for the surviving parties was noted as still under review. The live stream recording was collected as evidence. It was August 15, 2019. Heat sat heavy over the pastures outside Statesville, the kind of humid afternoon that kept cicadas loud in the tree line. A converted barn stood near the family farmhouse, its wide doors open for airflow, a few dog crates stacked along one wall, and a workbench cluttered with training gear near the center. It was the kind of day that felt perfectly normal, which makes what happened next even harder to accept. Barn work was second nature to Casey Wade Renwood, 31, who ran a small rescue and rehabilitation operation from that property. He live-streamed his training sessions to about 900 regulars, building a reputation on patience with fearful, reactive dogs. He believed muzzles were a temporary tool, not a permanent answer, and said so often online. He had no formal bite risk certification, just years of hands-on experience and 2 prior bites he had waved off as part of the trust-building process rather than warnings. He was actually confident, but looking back, I can see that his confidence was just a thin shield against a reality he refused to acknowledge. That week, he was working with Diesel, a Concorso recently surrendered after biting a previous handler during a restraint attempt, a detail sitting in shelter paperwork on his own workbench. wrench. He had read it before taking the dog in. His plan called for at least 2 weeks of muzzled handling before any hand feeding. By the third session, Diesel seemed calm enough that Casey felt ahead of schedule. He had not changed the written plan. We all want to believe we can skip the safety steps, but the danger doesn't care about our schedules. During that stream, a longtime donor needled him, saying he thought Casey was the trainer who did not need muzzles. Others piled on, accusing him of not trusting his own methods, telling him to either prove it or stop claiming it. Casey argued back for a few minutes, visibly annoyed, before deciding to show them directly. He unclipped Diesel's basket muzzle and reached forward with a treat, weeks ahead of his own protocol. Diesel lunged the instant the muzzle came off. His jaws closed on the inside of Casey's upper arm just above the elbow, and Casey's own reflex to pull back tore the wound wider before the dog let go. He shouted and staggered out of the camera's fixed frame, leaving only the empty center of the barn on screen. A leg slid briefly into view once, then disappeared again. Blood started reaching the concrete floor seconds later, dark red pooling near the edge of the shot in slow, rhythmic bursts. Some viewers assumed it was fake, part of a bit. Others thought he had simply ended the stream after getting bitten. One viewer, an emergency room nurse, recognized the spurting pattern as likely arterial and typed repeatedly that someone needed to call for help immediately. No one watching knew his address. The stream stayed live, blood spreading slightly wider across the floor with each passing minute for almost 40 minutes before a friend who had seen the footage called Casey's sister, who lived nearby. She arrived, found him unconscious on the barn floor, and called 911 herself. Paramedics arrived and pronounced him dead at the scene. It is terrifying how many people watched him bleed out, debating whether it was real or just another show. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by a torn brachial artery. The report found Casey lost a fatal amount of blood within minutes of the bite, since no pressure or tourniquet was applied before he lost the strength to help himself. He was a man who thought he knew better than the rules, and that arrogance left him alone when he needed help most. The rescue barn closed permanently. Several regional shelters revised their foster transfer rules afterward, requiring full disclosure of any documented bite history before placing a dog with a volunteer handler. Too many people only learn the importance of safety once they are looking at a tragedy that should have been avoided. It was June 11th, 2020, in Slovenia. The road on the edge of town was still damp from overnight rain. Traffic was light, and a camera was mounted on a car parked at a side junction while its owner finished a phone call. Behind that quiet stood Nina Oblak, 30. She had spent 6 years as a designer before building a cycling channel that grew almost by accident, where she filmed practical fixes for a city full of bike lanes. She tested every idea herself before posting it, earning the trust of a loyal audience. 4 months earlier, she had quit her job entirely. It was a brave but risky move, giving up a steady paycheck for something that still had to prove it could work as a full-time career. Her newest project was a bicycle rigged with a small blender, powered by a friction drive against the rear wheel. Pedaling turned the blades. She had built it with a friend, and she had already filmed it working on a flat path. That footage was solid, but in her opinion, it was just plain boring. She kept deleting those takes. In a voice note her family later found, she said the successful runs looked like a product demo, not a real moment. She wanted the first sip on camera to feel unplanned, not staged. She scouted a shallow downhill stretch where she could coast without pedaling, freeing both hands to hold the smoothie toward her chest camera. She had tested the coasting, and she had tested the smile and the sip while standing still. But, and this is where it gets dangerous, she had never combined both while moving, hands off the bars, heading into a bend she had not even walked beforehand to check. On the morning of the ride, the road still held patches of wet leaves from the night's rain. She didn't check the surface or the bend before recording. She adjusted her camera, checked her reflection in a car mirror, and pushed off down the slope. The parked camera recorded the entire ride. Nina coasts into frame, one hand briefly leaving the handlebars to straighten the strap. About 4 seconds later, she lets go with both hands and lifts the cup toward her face, smiling into the lens. The bike, with nothing correcting its line, begins drifting toward the road's edge as the bend tightens ahead of her. It's incredibly frustrating because she remained focused on getting the perfect smile just as the bike began drifting toward the edge. She looks up about half a second too late. Her hand reaches for the bars and misses. The bike carries her past the low guardrail, and she drops nearly 13 feet onto rocky ground beside a ditch. The impact scatters the cup and part of the blender rig. She does not move after landing. The driver who owned the camera heard the crash and ran to the edge, calling emergency services immediately. He climbed down and found her unconscious but breathing. Because the location was far from the nearest station, paramedics did not arrive for 20 minutes. She was taken to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead that evening. The autopsy listed the cause of death as catastrophic head injuries, consistent with an unhelmeted fall onto rock from that height. It's truly hard to ignore that she had worn a helmet in almost every previous video, but not this one. Investigators concluded that the injuries were so severe they were unlikely to have been survivable. Her hands showed no injuries from bracing, suggesting she had little or no time to break or fall before impact. Her design studio later created a small non-profit funding helmet giveaways for cyclists. Her laptop held 11 earlier takes of the same ride, saved in a folder labeled More Authentic. The 12th take, the one that caused the accident, was the only one ever posted. Her family uploaded it themselves, unedited, days after the funeral. It was September 19, 2017, in a small apartment building near Glendale Boulevard in Los Angeles, California. The building was quiet that evening, and nothing unusual could be seen from the outside. Hours later, investigators would enter one of the units and begin reconstructing a sequence of events that had already ended in tragedy. Just months before that night, Bella Vane, 23, had been trying to grow a small beauty and fashion channel online. She filmed makeup tutorials, clothing hauls, and casual updates from her apartment bedroom. Her audience was small but loyal. Most videos drew only a few hundred views, but she treated each upload as progress toward becoming a full-time creator. Over time, Bella began experimenting with more dramatic content. She started posting videos suggesting someone might be watching her apartment. Viewers were encouraged to look for reflections in mirrors or shadows in hallways that might reveal a hidden stalker. The series quickly became her most discussed material, and her channel passed 3,000 subscribers during that period. On the evening of September 19th, Bella prepared another video continuing the storyline. She intended to claim someone had entered her apartment earlier that day. The plan was to stage a tense scene in the bathroom while describing strange noises she believed were coming from the building. Earlier that afternoon, maintenance workers had opened a ceiling access panel in the hallway to inspect plumbing lines. Bella mentioned the activity online and suggested someone could move through the crawl space above the apartments, which fit the narrative she had been building. Inside the apartment, she arranged the setting for the video. The bathroom lights were dim, and a small ring light illuminated the room. The bathtub had been filled nearly to the overflow drain. At some point later that night, something interrupted the routine she had planned. Bella stopped responding to messages from friends and followers who expected updates. Hours passed without any activity from her accounts. When repeated attempts to contact her failed, someone requested a welfare check at the apartment. Officers arrived at the building and knocked several times before forcing entry when no one answered. Bella was found on the bathroom floor beside the bathtub. Paramedics attempted resuscitation inside the apartment, but she showed no pulse and was not breathing. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later determined the cause of death through autopsy findings. Bruising around the neck and small hemorrhages in the eyes indicated manual strangulation. The pressure had restricted blood flow to the brain long enough to cause fatal oxygen deprivation. With the cause of death confirmed, investigators began examining Bella's recent online activity and the storyline she had been building around a supposed stalker. Messages recovered from her accounts revealed frequent contact with one follower who had become unusually involved in the narrative. Detectives also learned that small incidents Bella had mentioned online, objects moved in the hallway and noises above the apartment, may not have been imagined. Further investigation showed that the same individual had entered the building's crawl space after seeing Bella mention the hallway access panel in her posts, moving items in shared areas to reinforce the stalking story she was telling. Security footage later showed the man leaving the property that night. He was eventually identified and located by investigators. During questioning, he admitted visiting the apartment after following Bella's posts about the crawl space and the supposed intruder. According to investigators, he believed he was helping create a more convincing scene for her content. Authorities concluded that the encounter turned into a struggle inside the bathroom, where Bella was fatally strangled. The case was officially ruled a homicide. Investigators concluded that the follower had entered the apartment after becoming involved in the stalking storyline Bella had been posting online. The man was later arrested and charged with murder after authorities determined the encounter escalated into a struggle inside the bathroom where Bella Vane was fatally strangled. It was a Saturday morning in mid-January 2017 in a quiet residential neighborhood on the western edge of Portland, Oregon. The sky was flat and gray the way it gets in January out there, and the streets were mostly empty by the time Petra Windholm sat down at her kitchen counter and started preparing what she had decided would be the centerpiece of her entire wellness philosophy. Petra Windholm was 36 years old and lived with her husband in a mid-century home she had spent years renovating into what she described on her blog as a chemical-free, intentional living space. She worked occasional shifts at a small, natural food store, but her real investment was the wellness blog she had been running since 2014. It was not large by any measurable standard, but it had a loyal readership, and Petra treated it with the seriousness of a full-time occupation. The blog covered what she called ancestral nutrition, a loose philosophy built around the idea that modern food processing had destroyed the nutritional integrity of everything most people ate. She wrote about sourcing, about organic certification, about the dangers of cooking at high temperatures, and what she believed it did to enzymes and nutrients. Her readers trusted her, and she wrote with the kind of confidence that tends to read as authority even when it is not. By late 2016, she had become particularly focused on raw organ meat. Through forums and self-published wellness literature, rather than any clinical source, she had become convinced that raw beef liver was among the most nutrient-dense foods a person could consume, and that cooking it destroyed the very compounds that made it valuable. She began working toward what she planned to present as her most definitive post yet, a raw liver protocol she had developed herself, intended as proof that everything her critics had been saying about food safety was nothing more than industry-driven fear. Critics had been vocal for months, including one claiming to be a nutritionist, but Petra dismissed them all, calling their concerns overblown and even removing some of the criticism from her blog entirely. That last part is what gets me. She was not just confident, she was actively cutting out the voices telling her to slow down. She sourced what she believed was a premium grass-fed beef liver from a local supplier and stored it in her refrigerator for 2 days before use. Raw beef liver carries a significant salmonella risk that proper cooking eliminates entirely, but that no amount of sourcing quality can guarantee against. Petra knew the concern existed and had addressed it on her blog before, arguing that organic certification made it irrelevant. It did not. On the morning of January 14th, she prepared and consumed a substantial portion of the liver raw. Her husband was home and later recounted that she had been in good spirits, treating the whole thing as a milestone. Symptoms began within 18 hours, nausea first, then cramping, and a steadily climbing fever. Petra attributed it to what she called a detox response and did not seek any help, telling her husband the same thing she had told her readers for years, that the body knew how to handle itself if you gave it the right inputs. By the third day, she could not keep anything down. Her husband brought her in for care on January 17th. The infection had already progressed significantly. Salmonella was confirmed and her condition continued to deteriorate over the following 2 days despite intervention. Petra Windholm died on January 19th, 2017, 5 days after consuming the raw liver. The cause of death was septic shock, resulting from a severe Salmonella enterica infection, confirmed as originating from the raw beef liver she had prepared at home. Her husband had urged her to seek help 2 days before she agreed to, by which point the infection had already advanced beyond what treatment could reverse. The manner of death was ruled accidental, and the case was concluded without further proceedings. It was October 14th, 2016, in Atlanta, Georgia. The kind of night where the main streets still had movement, but the side blocks had already gone quiet. Not exactly a safe area once it got late, and most people who lived there knew to keep it moving. Reeve Morrow was 27. He worked part-time at a warehouse on the outskirts of the city, mostly loading and unloading freight. Simple, physical work on a steady schedule. Outside of that, most of his attention went into his channel, a small street vlog he'd been running for a little over a year, where he walked through different parts of Atlanta at night, camera in hand. narrating whatever he came across. Empty intersections, dim parking lots, quiet side streets most people wouldn't normally walk through after dark. That was his thing. He didn't have a large audience, a few hundred regular viewers, maybe a bit more depending on the week, but he treated it seriously. He'd invested around $3,800 into his setup, camera body, lenses, stabilizer rig, and he made sure people knew it. He had mentioned a few times on stream that going live made him feel safer, that having people watching would act as a kind of backup if anything went wrong. That belief made him more willing to take risks while filming alone. On October 14th, he was walking a poorly lit block about half a mile from a busier commercial strip. It was close to 11 p.m. The area wasn't empty, but most people were already off the streets. A few passing cars, distant movement at intersections, but long stretches where it was just him and the sound of his own steps. He was filming. As usual, camera up, speaking into it while walking at a steady pace. He'd stop occasionally to glance around, then continue narrating whatever he was seeing. Just another night of content. Nothing that felt different from the ones before it. A few seconds earlier, everything was normal enough that you wouldn't think much of it. Then, two men stepped out from a nearby parking lot and started moving toward him. At first, it wasn't immediate panic, just that quick mental adjustment when you notice people crossing into your path. But they didn't slow down. They closed the distance directly, cutting off the space in front of him. Within seconds, they made it clear what they wanted: the camera bag and the equipment. Instead of putting it down and stepping away, he turned the camera directly toward them, continuing to film and address the live stream even after they told him to stop. That's when one of them grabbed the strap. Reeve kept the camera up, but his voice changed. The steady narration broke into short, uneven phrases, not really talking anymore, more reacting. The live stream was still running, but it didn't feel controlled at that point, just ongoing. That small contact changed everything. Not because it was planned, but because it forced a reaction. Reeve instinctively tightened his grip, not a calculated choice, just reflex. A brief struggle followed. It was short, only a few seconds, but it escalated the situation instantly. The camera dipped during the movement, catching partial angles of the ground and nearby motion rather than anything stable. His voice came through in fragments, then dropped out between movement and distance. During that moment, one of the men reached into his waistband and produced a knife. Reeve was stabbed once in the abdomen. The shift after that was immediate. The attackers backed away and moved off on foot through the side streets without continuing the confrontation. The camera slipped from his hands during the struggle and hit the ground, still recording. The frame was mostly static now, angled toward the pavement, picking up scattered sound and movement, fading into distance. Across the street, a few bystanders noticed the confrontation as it happened. Some reacted immediately by calling emergency services while it was still happening. Others hesitated, not fully sure, until the attackers were already leaving. Only after the street cleared did anyone cross over. By the time they reached him, Reeve was already on the ground. Emergency services arrived shortly after, but his condition was already critical. He was pronounced dead later that night at a nearby medical facility. The cause of death was confirmed as a single stab wound to the abdomen sustained during a robbery attempt that escalated during a brief struggle. The case was treated as a criminal homicide. Despite witness accounts and partial footage from the recording, the individuals involved were not identified, and the case remains open. It was July 9, 2017, inside a service building in Las Vegas, Nevada. The area was not open to the public, a back corridor used only by maintenance workers, with metal panels bolted into the lower sections of the wall. One of those panels had a warning label on it. It said the space behind it was dangerous and that only workers with a permit were allowed inside. Erica Vale was 24. She ran an online channel built around getting into places most people had never seen. Locked buildings, restricted rooftops, sealed-off tunnels. Her view counts had been dropping, and she needed something bigger, something no one else had done. That day, she wanted to be the first person to film the inside of a sealed ventilation duct. The warning label was right in front of her when she started removing the screws. To her, that label was probably just part of the shot. One of you once commented, "Some things you don't attempt even if they look cool. Know your limitations and don't tempt your fate." I couldn't agree more. That line nails exactly what Erica missed. Kyle Benton was 26, her cameraman. He wasn't just someone who held a camera. He had actual training in ventilation work and knew what these spaces could do. He told her to stop multiple times before she even touched the panel. She kept going anyway. The opening was about 20 inches wide. Erica went in head first. Her shoulders pressed against both sides of the duct right from the start. She crawled forward, maybe 10 to 12 feet in, and the air around her was still and dusty, with barely any flow moving through it. The duct had been part of an older ventilation line that was no longer actively circulating air. The metal walls weren't perfectly even. One section had already started bending inward, damaged from age or weight from above. She breathed out to flatten her chest and push past it. That one moment, choosing to squeeze past a damaged section instead of backing out, was the decision that sealed everything that followed. I don't think she understood what that meant until it was already too late. Further in, the duct split into two directions. She tried to rotate her body to make the turn. That was the moment everything went wrong. Her shoulders and hips shifted diagonally, and the walls held her there. She couldn't go forward. She couldn't go back. And when she tried, the weakened section of metal bent further inward against her chest and sides, adding more pressure with every movement she made. What made it worse was that the more she struggled, the tighter it got. Her body's instinct to fight back was working directly against her. Kyle grabbed her legs and pulled. Nothing moved. He called for help fast, within minutes of her getting stuck. But fast wasn't fast enough for what was already happening inside that duct. 30 to 40 minutes passed. Her breathing got shallower. The metal pressing against her chest made it harder to expand her lungs with each breath. Panic burned through what oxygen she had left faster than her body could replace it. Kyle tried to force the metal open with his hands from the outside. The duct didn't give in. It was embedded within a wall cavity, limiting access to only one side, with no tools available to cut through reinforced sections. Her legs, which had been moving near the opening, slowed down. Then she stopped responding to his voice entirely. She was still inside the duct when she lost consciousness. The rescue crew had trouble reaching her. The corridor layout made it hard to navigate, and there was no easy access point built into the system. The duct itself wasn't directly exposed. It ran behind the corridor wall, fully enclosed. So responders had to break through the wall first just to reach the ductwork. They cut directly into the duct from that breach point, took apart a section of it, and pulled her out that way. She had no pulse. She wasn't breathing. She couldn't be revived. The cause of death was chest compression inside a confined space, not a sudden thing. Built slowly over those 30 to 40 minutes as the pressure held her chest in place and her body ran out of the strength to keep fighting it. That detail is the one I find hardest to sit with. It wasn't quick. Time was passing, and Kyle was right there, and still nothing could stop it. The incident was recorded as unauthorized entry into a restricted space. No permit, no safety equipment. Kyle did everything he could, so the outcome wasn't from a lack of effort. How many times have you brushed off advice because you thought you knew better? Erica's choices show just how dangerous it can be to ignore a clear warning. It was February 8th, 2020, in Akron, Ohio. Snow from earlier in the week had melted into slush along the streets, and the apartment building was quiet that evening. Inside one unit, a laptop was set up on a kitchen counter facing a stool. That man was Dennis Marcus Achebe, or everyone called him Denny. 26, a warehouse worker who spent his evenings streaming casual eating videos to about 150 regulars. He wasn't chasing fame. He liked making people laugh, and the small tip jar helped cover rent some months. His humor was quick and self-deprecating, and his audience felt more like a group chat than a fan base. It is easy to forget that behind every username is a person with bills to pay, anxieties to manage, and a quiet hope that someone out there is listening. Years earlier, shrimp had given him hives, nothing worse. He had joked about it once on stream, saying he would die if anyone made him eat shrimp, and everyone laughed and moved on. He figured the reaction was a childhood thing, mild and long gone. We often treat our own health history with a dangerous kind of carelessness, assuming that past warnings no longer apply to our present. That night, bills were overdue, and Denny opened a stream called Chat Picks Dinner. Whatever dish got the most donations, he would order and eat it live. He expected wings or gas station junk food. Instead, a cluster of regulars, remembering his old joke, all chipped in for the same spicy shrimp platter as a bit. The total climbed past what he would need for groceries and half his rent. The internet has a way of turning a person's vulnerabilities into a game, often without anyone realizing that the stakes have become dangerously real. He stared at the number for a long moment. Refunding it meant losing the money. He told Chat he would just try one piece, said the worst case was that he would get itchy, and convinced himself he probably outgrew it anyway. The food arrived 30 minutes later, steam still rising off the shrimp. 2 minutes into eating, he rubbed his mouth, said his lips felt tingly, and blamed the spice. A few minutes after that, he was clearing his throat between bites, laughing that the seasoning was stronger than advertised. By minute 6, his eyes had started to puff, his neck reddening, and his voice dropped into a scratchy half-whisper he tried to play off as part of the joke. Watching someone struggle while they are still trying to maintain the performance is a uniquely painful kind of theater. Some viewers were asking if he was all right, but most people just spammed laughing emojis, telling him to stay in character and keep the show going. The actual warnings got lost in the chat immediately. About 8 minutes in, he couldn't even finish a sentence. He was just wheezing. He grabbed the edge of the counter, trying to pull himself up, and mouthed something no one could make out before he just vanished from the frame. The camera kept rolling, just staring at an empty countertop. Nothing else appeared on screen. The stream stayed live for almost 3 hours. A friend of his saw a screenshot some other creator posted making fun of how swollen Denny's face looked. He tried calling, got nothing, and ended up calling the landlord to check on him. When the landlord got in with a spare key, he found Denny unresponsive on the kitchen floor, with the stream still running right there beside him. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by anaphylaxis from a shrimp allergy. The reaction swelled his airway and tightened his chest, cutting off his oxygen until his heart stopped. No epinephrine was found in the apartment, and no signs of drugs or alcohol were present. Before anyone knew Denny had died, clips of his swollen face were already spreading online as a funny food challenge fail. After local news reported his death a few days later, most of those posts disappeared. By then, the damage had already been done. Our online presence is fleeting and often cruel, but the void left by a life cut short is permanent. It was February 7th, 2014. A private test track outside Guadalajara was quiet that morning. Tire marks covered the asphalt as the crew prepared for another round of filming. It was behind that test that stood Jimena Rosa Zavala, 32. She had started her channel after a child car seat she bought for her nephew was recalled because of a safety defect. Instead of simply telling people what happened, she began breaking down why products failed and showing the evidence herself. Over time, her videos shifted toward reviewing inexpensive automotive accessories and gadgets sold online and through late-night infomercials. She became known for testing every product herself instead of relying on demonstrations or manufacturer claims. I think that's what made people trust her. She wasn't trying to scare viewers, she wanted them to see the evidence for themselves. As her audience grew, engineers and safety professionals occasionally shared technical documents and public safety bulletins with her, trusting her platform to reach the public faster than corporate channels. And one of those products was a plastic seatbelt clip marketed as a comfort device that pulled the shoulder belt away from the wearer's neck. Road safety experts had already warned that accessories like it could interfere with how a seatbelt distributes crash forces during a collision, which sounds like a terrifyingly simple way to make a life-saving tool fail. But the product was still widely available online. Jimena decided to test the claim herself. She rented a closed test track outside Guadalajara, hired a licensed stunt coordinator, and kept 2 paramedics on standby. The goal was to compare a standard seatbelt with the same seatbelt fitted with the aftermarket clip during a controlled barrier impact. The first test took place the previous day at about 15 miles an hour. The vehicle struck the padded barrier exactly as planned. Jimena walked away without injury, and the footage showed only limited movement inside the cabin. According to the stunt coordinator's later statement to investigators, he considered the demonstration complete and advised against increasing the speed because the production vehicle and temporary barrier setup had only been prepared for low-speed testing. Personally, this is the point where I wish the project had ended. The first test had already answered the question. The following afternoon, the crew prepared for another run. Production notes later reviewed by investigators showed the planned impact speed had been increased to just under 35 miles an hour. Crew members later told investigators that Jimena believed the lower speed impact wasn't representative of the kinds of crashes most drivers actually survive on city roads, and that she wanted to show viewers how the aftermarket clip would behave in a more realistic collision. The coordinator again warned that the vehicle and barrier setup weren't designed for the higher speed, but filming continued after everything was reset. One camera mounted inside the vehicle and another positioned beside the track captured the entire collision. As the car struck the barrier, investigators observed that the shoulder belt no longer rested across the center of Jimena's chest. Instead, the aftermarket clip had redirected the belt closer to her neck, a chilling reminder of how easily a small modification can cross a line you can't uncross, meaning that during the rapid forward movement, the restraint no longer controlled her upper body the way the original seatbelt was designed to. Although the driver's airbag deployed as expected, airbags are designed to work with a properly positioned seatbelt. Because her torso rotated sideways instead of staying centered in front of the airbag, her head moved outside its intended protection zone and struck the driver's side A-pillar before the movement stopped. Crew members ran to the vehicle immediately after the impact. Paramedics reached Jimena in less than a minute and rushed her to the nearest trauma center, but she died before arriving at the hospital. The autopsy determined that Jimena died from severe head, neck, and upper spinal injuries caused by blunt force trauma during the collision. Toxicology testing found no alcohol or drugs in her system. Investigators also examined the damaged restraint system and concluded that the aftermarket clip had changed the shoulder belt's position, reducing its ability to restrain the upper body during the crash. Their report found no evidence of mechanical failure in the vehicle itself. Within days, consumer safety organizations renewed warnings against aftermarket seatbelt positioning devices, and the manufacturer removed the product from sale while conducting what it described as an internal review. Investigators did not recommend criminal charges but criticized the safety decisions that led to the crash. Jimena's sister later preserved the channel as an archive of her product investigations, allowing viewers to continue accessing the testing and safety information she had spent years documenting. What stays with me is that Jimena wasn't chasing danger. She was trying to verify whether a product people trusted was actually safe, and the very test meant to protect others ended up costing her life. It was January 18th, 2018. A white cargo van sat alone at a gravel turnout in the Mojave Desert, California. Overnight temperatures dropped below freezing. Inside the van, a small propane heater ran in a tightly sealed space. By morning, the vehicle looked quiet against the open desert. No one nearby realized the night inside had already turned fatal. Marina Cole, 29, had started a modest van life YouTube channel the year before. A freelance graphic designer from Phoenix, she had grown tired of moving between short contracts and small apartments. She sold most of her belongings, bought a used cargo van, and converted it into a simple mobile home. Her channel attracted about 5,000 subscribers. Marina filmed calm routines, cooking on a small stove, organizing storage bins, and hiking desert trails before parking beside empty landscapes. The videos showed quiet mornings and sunsets, a peaceful version of van life she carefully curated for viewers. During the second week of January, Marina drove across the Mojave looking for winter camping spots to film. Weather forecasts warned that nighttime temperatures would fall into the mid-20s. Travelers using heaters in enclosed vehicles were advised to keep the ventilation open. Marina carried a compact propane heater, commonly used by van campers. Most users left a window slightly cracked to allow fresh air inside. That night, however, the cold pushed her to seal the van more tightly. She closed the roof vent and packed towels into small gaps near the rear doors to keep warm air from escaping. By midnight, the interior had warmed enough for her to stop filming and settle onto the bed platform. The heater continued running near the floor. At some point during the early morning hours, the air inside the van began to change. The heater continued running in the sealed space as Marina rested inside, unaware that something dangerous was slowly building in the air around her. Inside the van, nothing dramatic would have seemed wrong. The heater ran quietly. Her phone and laptop remained on the fold-out desk beside the bed, and a mug sat near the stove from the last time she made tea. Marina likely became disoriented as the air inside the van slowly changed. Without realizing what was happening, she lay back down on the sleeping platform. She eventually lost consciousness while the heater continued running inside the sealed vehicle. When investigators later examined the van, they found no signs of struggle or attempts to leave the vehicle. The vehicle remained parked at the turnout for more than 2 weeks. Wind pushed sand against the tires and dust settled across the windshield. Hikers occasionally passed nearby, but nothing about the van appeared unusual among the scattered overnight campers. Concern began online instead of in the desert. Followers noticed Marina's social media accounts continued posting photos every few days. The updates described desert roads and quiet campsites, making it appear she was still traveling across the Southwest. One subscriber recognized a trailhead visible in the background of a scheduled post and contacted park authorities. Rangers drove to the turnout late that afternoon and knocked repeatedly on the van. When no one responded, they forced the rear doors open. Marina was found on the sleeping platform inside. A ranger radioed for emergency services at 4:12 p.m. Deputies and paramedics arrived about 20 minutes later, but Marina showed no signs of life. The heater had already shut off after the fuel cylinder emptied. The coroner later determined the cause of death as carbon monoxide poisoning. Blood tests showed extremely high levels of carboxyhemoglobin, meaning most oxygen-carrying cells in her body had been replaced by carbon monoxide. Investigators found no defect in the heater itself. The sealed van had allowed the gas to build slowly overnight. Authorities ruled the case an accidental death caused by improper ventilation. Investigators later discovered that Marina had scheduled weeks of posts before leaving Phoenix. While her van remained parked silently in the desert, her accounts continued uploading travel photos, creating the illusion that the journey was still ongoing. It was a Thursday morning in early March 2017 in a mid-sized neighborhood on the northern edge of Denver, Colorado. The sidewalks were still damp from an overnight frost, and the morning had barely warmed up by the time Denise Gruzdek walked through the front door of a small chiropractic office a few blocks from her home. Denise Gruzdek was 44 years old and worked as an office administrator for a small property management company. Outside of her day job, Denise hosted a small podcast she had. Launched in late 2015, built around the idea that patients who push back got better outcomes than those who simply followed what they were told. It had a few thousand regular listeners by early 2017, and chiropractic care had come up more than once as something she believed the medical community was too quick to dismiss. She had been dealing with chronic neck stiffness for the better part of 2 years. She had seen a general practitioner about it once, received a referral for physical therapy, and dismissed it without a second thought. Physical therapy, in her view, was for people who did not know how to advocate for themselves. She had done her own research and she knew what would fix it. That research consisted almost entirely of videos she had been watching online for several months. Chiropractic adjustment clips, specifically high-velocity cervical manipulations, had become a regular habit. She watched them the way some people watch tutorials, forming opinions and building what she believed was a working understanding of the procedure. By early 2017, she had fully convinced herself that a single aggressive neck adjustment was all she needed and that the only reason she had not gotten one was because no practitioner had been willing to do it properly. That distinction between watching something and understanding it is one that gets people killed more often than I think anyone wants to admit. She booked an appointment at a chiropractic office near her home and arrived with her mind already made up. When the practitioner completed his initial assessment and recommended a conservative course of treatment, starting with soft tissue work and gradual mobilization, Denise rejected it immediately. She told him his approach was too cautious and that her research had already told her what she needed. She was not aggressive about it. She was composed, certain, and completely immovable, which, if anything, is harder to deal with than someone who is just loudly difficult. The practitioner offered alternatives. Denise declined each one. She made it clear she would not be coming back if he was unwilling to perform what she was asking for. He eventually agreed, on the condition that she sign a standard consent form outlining the known risks of the procedure, including, explicitly, the possibility of vascular injury. Denise signed it without reading it and booked a follow-up for the following week. I find it hard to decide which part is worse, that she was warned in writing or that she treated it like a receipt. She returned the next Thursday. The high-velocity cervical manipulation was performed. Within roughly 3 minutes, she told the practitioner she had a sudden and severe headache at the base of her skull. She lost consciousness in the chair shortly after. A receptionist and one other patient in the waiting area heard the commotion and witnessed the immediate aftermath. What had occurred was a vertebral artery dissection, a tear in one of the arteries running along the cervical spine that supplies blood to the brainstem. It is a documented though uncommon complication of high-velocity cervical manipulation, and the brainstem stroke that followed was rapid and irreversible. I think about the consent form whenever a story lands here. She was told it was written down in plain language, and she moved past it without a second thought. The medical examiner determined that Denise died as a result of a brainstem stroke caused by vertebral artery dissection following a high-velocity cervical manipulation. A formal review was conducted, during which the signed consent form and the documented record showing that Denise had explicitly requested the procedure against the practitioner's initial recommendation were entered as central evidence. The practitioner was not charged. It was July 19, 2015 in Columbus, Ohio, a quiet residential area on the edge of the city where most afternoons passed without much going on. The kind of neighborhood where nothing really stands out until it does. Shane Lohman was 29 and not working a traditional job at the time. Most of his energy went into a small prank channel he ran online. His content was pretty straightforward. Staged public scenarios designed to look real, just long enough to catch genuine reactions from strangers. Nothing too elaborate at first, but over time, the setups got more convincing, less obvious framing, more reliance on how people would naturally interpret what they were seeing. He had a habit of picking locations that gave him the most natural backdrop. Public parks were a regular choice, enough foot traffic to get reactions, open enough to move around freely, and casual enough that nothing felt out of place until the scenario was already running. On this particular afternoon, he set up in a public park near a residential neighborhood. The concept was simple: a staged chase between him and a second person, looping through the open area near a small pond at the center of the park. A friend operated a second camera from a fixed position about 50 feet away to capture wider reactions from bystanders passing through. The park had light activity, people walking paths, sitting on benches, a few kids moving through the open grass. The pond had a narrow concrete border running along its edge, maybe 2 feet wide, slightly uneven in places where the surface had settled over time. Shane walked it briefly before they started filming, but still chose to run along the edge during the take. So, what could go wrong with a fake chase in a public park? Apparently, quite a bit. Filming started without any issues. Shane moved through the open area at a jog, staying close to the pond's edge to keep the background tight and visually interesting. A few bystanders slowed down to watch, unsure of what they were seeing. Others kept moving but glanced over as they passed. That uncertainty was exactly what the setup was designed to produce. After the first pass, he looped back to reset for a second take. Same pace, same path along the concrete border. His right foot caught an uneven section of the surface. The kind of thing you'd normally notice if you were paying attention, but easy to miss when you're focused on performing for a camera. His footing went out from under him almost instantly. No time to adjust, no time to catch himself. He dropped roughly 3 feet before the left side of his head struck the concrete border with significant force. The impact was immediate. He rolled off the edge and into the shallow water along the bank, coming to rest partially submerged near the pond's edge. The second camera captured the whole thing from 50 feet out. Several bystanders within about 20 to 30 feet of the pond saw it happen in real time. A few of them hesitated at first. The setup had been convincing enough that the line between performance and actual accident wasn't immediately clear. It took a few seconds before people started moving toward him. By the time they reached the water's edge, Shane was face down and unresponsive. Bystanders pulled him out of the shallow water and kept him as stable as possible while emergency services were called. He was transported to a nearby medical facility, but was pronounced dead later that evening. The cause of death was confirmed as severe blunt force head trauma from the fall. Footage from the second camera was reviewed as part of the official assessment and documented the full sequence from setup through impact. The incident was classified as an accidental death and the case was formally closed. It was May 11, 2017 in Houston, Texas. At the edge of a neighborhood street, there was a large storm drain opening built into the ground, the kind used to carry rainwater away during heavy storms. A warning sign near the entrance said, "Flash flood hazard." On the inside walls, dark water stains reached about 4 to 5 feet high, left behind from previous floods. Grace Boone was 23 years old and ran a vlogging channel built around exploring places most people stayed away from. Her viewers had started calling her out lately, saying her content felt staged and too safe. That criticism got to her. She wanted to prove them wrong, to go somewhere genuinely dangerous and film it without flinching. That day, the storm drain was her answer. Tyler Grant, 24, came with her. He worked in construction and knew enough about drainage systems and flood behavior to understand what that warning sign actually meant. He told her the weather conditions made it a bad idea. The sky was overcast and there was distant thunder, not directly overhead, but close enough to matter. Grace had already made up her mind. I get why she chose the storm drain. It looks raw and impossible to fake, but a camera doesn't make you invincible. It can't save you either. What made this location especially dangerous was something Grace couldn't see from where she was standing. Rain didn't need to be falling directly above them for the drain to flood. Water from storms miles upstream, rainfall they couldn't see or hear from where they stood, was already feeding into the system and building pressure. The high water marks on the walls weren't decoration. They were a record of exactly what this tunnel was capable of. Tyler pointed that out. Grace acknowledged it and went in anyway. They walked about 200 feet inside. The water at that point was shallow, just ankle deep, slow moving, nothing alarming. Grace was filming. The air inside was damp and the walls were covered in a thin layer of slick green algae along the lower sections. Tyler stayed close to the entrance side, keeping his distance from the deeper sections. Then, a low rumbling sound started somewhere in the tunnel. It was hard to tell where it was coming from. Sound moves strangely inside concrete tunnels, bouncing off the walls and making it difficult to figure out the direction. Grace paused. Tyler recognized it immediately and started moving toward her, telling her they needed to get out. Within about 30 to 60 seconds, the water went from ankle height to knee height, then waist height. The speed of that change is something most people don't expect the first time they experience it. It doesn't creep up slowly, it jumps. The current that came with it was strong enough that standing upright became difficult. Grace turned around to head back toward the entrance. She slipped. The algae on the concrete floor gave her no grip at all, and the current was already pushing hard against her legs. She went down, and the water took her immediately. There was no chance to recover her footing. The current was moving too fast, and the floor offered nothing to push against. Tyler grabbed onto a metal ladder rung set into the wall and reached out toward her as she was carried past. He couldn't get hold of her. She was already moving too fast. That moment, Tyler on the rung, arm out, unable to close the gap, is the kind of thing that stays with the people who live through it. Further inside, the tunnel narrowed. The water, now carrying debris, sticks, plastic, whatever had been sitting in the drain, pushed Grace into that section and pinned her against a metal grate built across the tunnel. The debris piled up around her. The water kept flowing. It didn't stop or slow down. It held her there, continuously pulling her under. Her movements slowed and then stopped. Tyler got himself out and called for help. Emergency responders arrived but couldn't enter the tunnel right away. The water level was still too high and the current too strong for anyone to go in safely. They had to wait for the flow to drop before access was possible. When the water level came down enough, they went in. Grace was found at the grate, still pinned there with debris built up around her. She was recovered and pronounced dead. The cause of death was drowning as a result of the flash flood inside the tunnel. Authorities secured the drain opening and added reinforced signage after the incident. Tyler later gave a full statement to authorities, explaining the sudden surge and confirming how quickly the water rose inside the tunnel. The warning that had been there before wasn't wrong. Just wasn't enough to stop someone who had already decided the risk was worth taking. One of you once commented that proving people wrong isn't worth your life. Watching Grace ignore Tyler's warnings, that line feels like the exact lesson here. It was June 9th, 2022, in Sedona, Arizona. A tattoo studio on the second floor of a small strip mall had a steady flow of weekend customers. Artists moved between appointments while music played quietly through the shop. One station, however, had drawn an unusual crowd. Sitting in the chair was 28-year-old Kieran Maddox Vale. He worked evenings at an outdoor gear store, but spent most of his free time live streaming challenge videos to a small online audience. His channel wasn't huge, just a few thousand regular viewers, but they liked how he let chat influence what happened next. That afternoon, Kieran announced a donation challenge. If viewers reached his fundraising goal for new streaming equipment, they could choose his next tattoo. He expected something funny or embarrassing, a cartoon character, a meme, maybe an inside joke from the community. Instead, one viewer donated enough to win outright. And the request? It was something neither I nor Kieran expected. Kieran agreed before seeing the design. The tattoo artist explained that a full-back piece would require a large stencil and several sessions. Wanting to keep the surprise for his live stream, Kieran asked not to see the full layout until the stencil had been applied. Nearly 4 hours into the session, the outline was finally complete. Throughout the live stream, viewers kept guessing how big the tattoo really was. Some joked it would barely cover one shoulder. Others claimed the donor had spent enough money to cover his entire back. Kieran laughed along, admitting he had no idea because the artist had refused to let him see the stencil until it was finished. When the artist finally stepped away, he rolled a full-length mirror in front of the chair and told Kieran he could look, and witnesses said he twisted around and froze. The Empire State Building stretched almost the full length of his back, from the tops of his shoulders to just above his waist. It was far larger than anything he had imagined. I can't even imagine that kind of shock. It's like he was suddenly wearing a permanent piece of history. For a few seconds, he just stared at his reflection, trying to take it in. Then he blurted out that it was way bigger than he expected, and instinctively pushed himself out of the chair before the artist had finished pulling the tattoo machine away. Witnesses later told investigators Kieran suddenly pushed himself up from the tattoo chair in obvious surprise while the artist was still working. The tattoo machine briefly dragged across his back before the artist immediately pulled it away. Startled by the sudden pain, Kieran stepped backward without looking where he was going. He caught his foot on the wide metal base of the tattoo chair as he stepped backward. His weight shifted onto his heel, and he tried to regain his balance by reaching for the workstation beside him, but his hand missed. The artist instinctively reached toward him, but was still standing on the opposite side of the chair and couldn't get there in time. Kieran stumbled backward another step before falling onto the hard tile floor. The back of his head struck the corner of a heavy steel workstation that held the studio's tattoo supplies. The impact echoed through the room, and the live stream immediately filled with confused comments as everyone nearby rushed toward him. Several customers later told investigators that Kieran appeared stunned for a moment and tried to move, but he quickly became unresponsive. The artist and another employee called emergency services, while another customer, who had first aid training, stayed beside him and followed the emergency dispatcher's instructions until paramedics arrived. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported him to the hospital. However, despite emergency treatment, he died later that day. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by a traumatic head injury sustained in the fall. Investigators concluded the fatal injury resulted from Kieran unexpectedly standing up during the tattoo session, losing his footing, and striking the steel workstation. Police found no evidence the donor intended to cause harm, and no charges were filed. The live stream ended moments after the fall and was later removed at his family's request. Afterward, the studio changed its procedures, requiring artists to stop work completely before clients were shown large stencil reveals or allowed to leave the chair. Looking back, what really stuck with Kieran's viewers wasn't the tattoo, but the sheer whiplash of watching a lighthearted stream suddenly spiral into a disaster. It is a brutal reminder of just how thin that line is between internet entertainment and a genuine, real-time emergency. It was October 3rd, 2021. The water off Mole Bowl was calm, with visibility of more than 65 feet. Dive boats were heading toward the offshore reefs, while local fishermen worked closer to shore. Conditions were ideal for filming, and dozens of tourists were already out on the water before noon. Zane Marco Villanueva was 29 years old. He ran a small YouTube channel reviewing cameras and underwater filming equipment. Every episode ended with the same phrase: he never zoomed. If he wanted a better shot, he moved closer. It sounded like good photography advice, but over time, it became the way he approached almost everything he filmed. Looking back, it's unsettling how a simple filming philosophy gradually became something much riskier. A video of Zane freediving near a thresher shark unexpectedly brought in hundreds of thousands of views. From then on, his audience became far more interested in close encounters with wildlife than camera setting. His videos slowly shifted away from equipment reviews and toward filming larger marine animals, including including whale sharks, sea turtles, and reef sharks. He still described each video as a lesson about composition or lighting, but he rarely acknowledged how much risk he was taking to capture those images. Before long, viewers were commenting less about the cameras and more about how close he could get to the animals. That afternoon, Zane hired a local boat and an experienced dive guide to help him film near an offshore reef where large sharks had occasionally been reported by local divers. He wanted low-angle footage showing the water just below the surface, so he climbed onto the boat's narrow outrigger beam and leaned so far over the water that his shoulder extended past the edge of the beam. To steady the camera, he lowered his filming arm into the water, leaving much of his upper arm exposed below the surface. He refused suggestions to film from farther back because he believed the wider angle would make the animals look too distant. For several minutes, nothing unusual happened. The dive guide remained about 15 feet away, watching both Zane and the surrounding area while the boat drifted slowly. The operator continued filming from inside the boat as Zane shifted even farther out over the outrigger, lowering his arm farther beneath the surface until nearly his entire forearm and part of his upper arm were underwater to steady the camera and reduce reflections. Then, a large shape appeared below him. An immature tiger shark, estimated at about 8 feet long, approached slowly from deeper water. It circled once beneath the boat before turning back towards Zane's arm, which was still extended well below the surface beside the submerged camera. The dive guide later told investigators the shark appeared to be investigating the movement rather than charging aggressively. Before anyone could warn him to pull back, the shark lunged upward and clamped onto the exposed upper portion of his arm near the shoulder where it was hanging closest to the surface. Panicked, Zane instinctively sat upright and kept lifting his injured arm to inspect the wound instead of keeping it still. The dive guide reached him almost immediately and, with help from the boat operator, pulled him fully back onto the boat. The guide instructed him to stop moving while applying firm, direct pressure to the wound as the boat turned back toward shore. They radioed for emergency assistance, but despite their efforts, the bleeding remained severe. The boat reached the pier as quickly as conditions allowed, where paramedics, already responding to the emergency call, took over his care. Zane was transported to a nearby hospital but died before arrival. The medical examiner determined that Zane died from massive blood loss after the shark's bite severely damaged the brachial artery in his upper arm. Investigators found no evidence that wildlife regulations had been violated, but they noted that no protective barrier or specialized shark filming safety procedures had been used, despite intentionally attempting close footage of a large wild animal. Despite the dive guide's immediate first aid, the injury was too severe to control with the limited medical equipment available on the small boat before definitive treatment could be reached. Afterward, the companies sponsoring Zane ended their partnerships and removed promotional posts featuring his channel. Marine safety organizations later cited the incident during educational presentations about photographing large marine animals, emphasizing that curiosity from wild sharks should never be mistaken for predictable behavior. It was August 12, 2017, along the coastline of Negros Oriental, Philippines. The tide had pulled back across a wide shelf of black volcanic rock, leaving shallow tide pools scattered between the stones. By late afternoon, a small tripod stood near the edge of the rocks while beachgoers moved quietly along the shoreline. Earlier that year, Cherry Dela Cruz, 26, had started a small YouTube channel built around beach foraging and inexpensive seafood mukbang videos. Online, she presented herself as someone comfortable along the shore, often speaking as if she had grown up around the ocean. In reality, Cherry was a city girl from Cebu City who had spent most of her life far from tide pools or fishing villages. Most of what she knew about shellfish came from watching local collectors along the shoreline and quickly researching species online before filming. That afternoon, she set up her phone beside a rocky inlet where tide pools formed between slick patches of algae-covered stone. Cherry placed several shells and small sea creatures onto a plastic tray, while her younger sister stood nearby, reading live-stream comments aloud. The plan was simple. Cherry would show viewers what she found in the tide pools, explain where each shell came from, and later cook anything edible. One shell in particular caught her attention. It was small and rounded, marked with pale brown triangular patterns that formed a faint net-like design across the shell. Light enough to sit comfortably in her palm, it looked like a harmless decorative shell someone might collect on a beach. Cherry turned it slowly between her fingers while explaining she had found it beneath a rock only minutes earlier. Then her hand jerked. A tiny puncture appeared near the base of her thumb. Cherry rubbed the spot and laughed, telling viewers it felt like a sharp sting. People nearby later said she mentioned it casually before continuing the video. At that moment, the sting seemed minor. For several minutes, nothing dramatic happened. Cherry continued arranging shells across the tray while talking to viewers. Then, her sister noticed something strange. Cherry began dropping items she had already picked up. A man collecting shells about 10 feet away later told investigators her movement suddenly looked slow and unsteady. Her speech began to blur. Words ran together, and sentences stopped halfway through. A woman walking along the rocks later said Cherry kept blinking repeatedly as if struggling to focus on the phone camera. Cherry tried to sit up straighter, but her shoulders sagged. Moments later, she tipped forward, striking the edge of the tray with her cheek before sliding sideways onto the rock. Her sister dropped the phone and shouted for help, while nearby beachgoers rushed across the tide pools. Several people carried Cherry toward the road, while someone ran to a nearby house to call emergency services. Witnesses said her breathing became shallow and irregular as they waited. Emergency responders arrived roughly 30 minutes later and attempted resuscitation, but Cherry had already stopped breathing. During the medical examination, investigators documented a small puncture wound on her thumb. Toxicology findings and witness statements helped reconstruct what had happened. The shell she had been holding was identified as a cone snail. Cone snail venom contains powerful neurotoxins capable of blocking the nerve signals that control muscles used for breathing. Even a small sting can cause rapid paralysis. The medical examiner ruled Cherry's death an accidental marine envenomation. Witnesses confirmed she had been holding the shell moments before the sting, and investigators found no signs of foul play. In the days after the incident, local collectors and residents along the shoreline began warning visitors not to handle unfamiliar shells in the tide pools. Cherry's body was later returned to Cebu City, where her family arranged her funeral after authorities ruled the death an accidental marine envenomation. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late July 2016 in a residential neighborhood on the eastern edge of Phoenix, Arizona. The temperature had already pushed past 104 degrees, and most people on the block had the good sense to stay inside. Cora Belson was 38 years old and owned a modest single-story home on a quiet street she had lived on for nearly 6 years. Alongside her bookkeeping work, Cora ran a home and property blog she had been building since 2015. It had grown steadily to a few thousand readers, mostly homeowners interested in renovation and property management. She wrote with authority on everything from landscaping to boundary disputes, and her readers trusted her recommendations. The fence situation with her neighbor had made it into at least one post, framed as a case study in how to handle difficult neighbors on your own terms. Cora was the kind of neighbor who kept a mental log and acted on every item, whose trash can stayed out too long, whose dog wandered too close to her garden, whose fence post leaned 2 inches in the wrong direction. She addressed all of it, directly, and without much patience, for pushback. Her neighbors knew better than to dismiss her complaints. That never went well for anyone. The dispute with the man next door had been building all summer over a section of shared fencing where Cora believed he had made modifications without consulting her. From that point forward, anything connected to that fence was a matter of principle, and she had made that clear to anyone who would listen. So when he noticed a wasp nest on that same fence post in mid-July and told her it was large enough to need a professional, that he had already looked into getting someone out, Cora shut it down immediately. It was her fence, her nest, and her call. He backed off. He had learned by then that pushing back only made things worse. Being given a way out and still rejecting it, not for a better plan, but because it felt like losing, that kind of stubbornness quietly closes off options before you even realize it. She did not call anyone else either. A few days after that conversation, she went into her garage and came back out with an aerosol can she was confident would handle it. Based on what was found at the scene, the can was a general-purpose household lubricant spray, not a wasp or hornet-specific product. It would have done nothing to a colony of that size under any circumstances. She approached the nest with no protective clothing, no gloves, nothing covering her face or neck. That choice alone tells you everything about where her head was that afternoon. She began spraying directly at the nest from close range. The spray did not disperse the colony. What it did was agitate it. Within seconds, the wasps responded. Two neighbors observed what followed, one from a driveway 2 houses down, and the man next door who had stepped outside at the sound of the commotion. Both described the swarm as immediate and concentrated, targeting her face and neck almost entirely. She stumbled backward onto the lawn within roughly 90 seconds of the first sting. That margin, 90 seconds, is something that genuinely unsettles me. She was on her own property, in broad daylight, with neighbors close enough to see everything, and none of that made any difference once it started. She had no documented history of a diagnosed allergy. But an undetected sensitivity to wasp venom is more common than most people realize, and a concentrated number of stings to the face and throat accelerates anaphylaxis in ways that even a mild underlying sensitivity cannot withstand. Her airway was compromised before anyone reached her. The neighbor next door was the first to get to her. There was nothing he could do by that point. Cora Belson did not survive the afternoon. The cause of death was anaphylactic shock, triggered by multiple wasp stings concentrated around her face and neck, with findings confirming an undiagnosed hypersensitivity to the venom. The incident was ruled accidental. No one else was held responsible, including the neighbor who had already warned her, and the case was closed shortly after. It was March 12, 2017 in Tucson, Arizona, a quiet residential neighborhood where most homes were already settled in for the night and the street stayed mostly empty after dark. Tiara Pruitt was 24. She worked part-time in retail and spent most of her free time creating lifestyle and wellness content online. Her videos were simple, home routines, drink recipes, and trending clean living ideas she came across on social media. Nothing high budget, just her phone, a small setup in her apartment, and whatever was currently circulating online. Over time, she had gotten into a pattern of repeatedly seeing the same kinds of wellness trends across different platforms. Detox drinks, cleanse routines, herbal mixes, often reposted in slightly different formats but always presented the same way: simple, natural, and harmless. The more she engaged with that type of content, the more her feed began to reinforce it. Similar videos would keep appearing from unrelated accounts, repeating the same ideas in slightly different ways. It created a kind of familiarity, where the repetition itself started to feel like validation, even without any clear source behind it. That's kind of how the algorithm works against you without you even noticing. Most of the products she used were ordered online. The listings looked clean and convincing, usually with general descriptions like natural blend or clean supplement formula. There was little detail about manufacturing or testing, and at least one of the supplements she used came from a seller with no verifiable source or safety certification. And why would she? It had good photos and a clean label. She was in her apartment preparing one of those drinks for a video on this day. It was a variation of a detox-style mix she had seen repeated across multiple posts, though the exact instructions were never consistent between sources. The general idea stayed the same: combine powdered supplements, herbal extracts, and an acidic liquid into one drink and use it as part of a daily routine, despite no clear guidance on how those ingredients interacted when taken together. She set her phone on a small stand in her kitchen and started recording, keeping the frame simple with herself at the counter and the ingredients laid out beside her. She adjusted the angle once or twice before starting, making sure it looked clean on camera. Even while filming, she would occasionally pause to re-stir the mixture or recenter the shot, treating it like a routine process she had done many times before. A friend was in the apartment with her while she filmed, sitting nearby and occasionally helping adjust the phone or check the framing. It wasn't treated as anything unusual at the time, just another content session like the ones she had done before. She mixed the ingredients together in a glass, stirring until it looked uniform, and talked through the steps as she filmed. The process itself didn't feel unusual to her because it followed the same structure as other wellness content she had already made. Around half an hour later, things started to change more noticeably. At first, it was mild discomfort. Nothing immediate or dramatic, just enough that she paused what she was doing and sat down for a moment. The friend with her initially assumed it was something minor, like a reaction that would pass on its own, especially since she was still able to talk and respond normally at that stage. But over the next stretch of time, her condition didn't settle. Instead, she became more visibly unwell and increasingly disoriented, showing signs that something more serious than a mild reaction was developing. Her responses slowed, and she began having difficulty focusing on the conversation. The friend stayed with her and tried to keep her steady, initially waiting for improvement, but becoming increasingly concerned as her condition continued to worsen without any sign of recovery. There was no clear moment where everything changed at once. It was gradual, which made it harder to immediately recognize how serious it was becoming. Eventually, her condition worsened to the point where she was no longer responding normally, and emergency services were called. By the time help arrived, she was already in critical condition. She was transported to a nearby medical facility, but despite treatment, she was later pronounced dead. A subsequent review of the products involved noted inconsistencies in labeling and a lack of clear regulatory verification. One of the supplements was later identified as containing an unverified compound with no established safety data, and the combination she consumed had never been tested for safe use. Nothing flagged it, just a clean page and a 5-star review. The recording from her phone was stopped after the incident was discovered, and earlier footage from the session was later reviewed as part of the investigation. It was August 22nd in 2018 at a riverside forest park along the Silver River in central Florida, an area where invasive rhesus macaques have been documented for decades. The park was open to the public and had signs posted near the areas where wildlife was known to gather. The sign said not to feed the animals and not to get close to them. There were monkeys in this park, macaques, and they were used to people being around. Leah Trench was 26 years old and ran a lifestyle channel online. For a while, her content had been doing well, fashion, daily routines, that kind of thing. But her numbers had been dropping. The idea she had that day was to get close to the monkeys, maybe get one to eat from her hand, and film the whole thing. She wanted her audience to see her as someone fearless and connected with nature. Javier Soto, 31, was her camera operator. He was there to film her. He also told her more than once that getting close to the monkeys was a bad idea. She didn't listen. I've seen creators hit that point where views drop, and suddenly every idea has to be bigger, bolder. Leah's choice shows that some things just aren't worth doing for views. Leah had brought fruit with her. She crouched low, held the fruit out, and locked direct eye contact with one of the macaques, a behavior that can be interpreted as a threat or challenge in primate social cues. The macaque lunged and bit down hard into her forearm. These animals are fast and their teeth are built for gripping. The bite was deep, not a surface scratch. Before she could pull back, a second monkey moved in. It bit her hand and wrist and left several deep scratches across her arm. The wounds bled heavily. She pulled away and dropped the fruit, and the animals moved off. Javier told her she needed to go get medical help right away. Macaque bites carry a high risk of bacterial contamination, including Streptococcus, Staphylococcus, and Pastorella. Leah wrapped her arm with something she had with her and said she was fine. She kept filming on and off for the rest of that day. Over the next 3 to 5 days, the arm got worse. The area around the bites swelled up, the skin around the wounds turned red, and the redness started spreading outward. The punctures sealed at the surface while trapping infection underneath, accelerating bacterial growth. The pain got worse instead of better. Leah posted updates during this period. Some of them showed her arm. She framed it as part of the story, something she was pushing through. She did not go to a doctor. By around days 6 to 10, her body had started losing the fight with the infection. A fever set in. She became weak. The infection progressed into sepsis, bacteria entering the bloodstream and triggering systemic inflammation, dropping blood pressure and starving organs of oxygen. At that point, the infection becomes something the body almost cannot handle on its own. She was eventually brought to a hospital after she stopped being responsive enough to take care of herself. Doctors treated her, giving IV antibiotics and fluids, but she was already in septic shock, where circulation collapses and organs begin to fail. The infection had already spread too far by the time she got there. Her condition kept getting worse despite everything that was done. Leah died from the infection. The medical findings were clear. The cause of death was septic shock from untreated deep primate bite infections. The bacteria found was consistent with what is commonly carried by primates. The delay in getting treatment, more than a week, was the key factor in how far the infection spread before anything was done about it. In the aftermath, sections of the river trail were closed, warnings were reinforced, and public health advisories stressed immediate treatment for any primate bite. It was November 11, 2021. A cold front had settled over rural Vermont, dropping temperatures fast after sundown. Back roads sat empty, tree lines dark against a moonless sky, cell coverage already thin in the hills. Most houses along the main route had their porch lights off for the night. Driving those roads at night felt normal to Owen Michael Castell, 24, who worked as a rideshare driver during the day and live-streamed his night drives to a small, close-knit audience. He was a cautious, methodical person who took pride in keeping his old car clean and reliable, and he often told his viewers he valued his own safety above any content goal. He treated his channel like a group chat, preferring to talk through his worries in his day rather than perform for stunts. It is always the quiet ones, the ones who seem to have their act together, who end up caught in the worst situations. That night, a regular viewer sent in coordinates gathered from an online forum about supposedly haunted roads. The route seemed like any other trip, guiding him along familiar highways until his signal began to drop and his navigation app showed an error warning. Ahead of him lay a narrow, dark dirt road leading deep into the woods, completely unmarked and without a single streetlight. Owen stopped his car and told his chat that the road looked unmaintained, saying he felt it was safer to turn around. His audience immediately pushed back, reminding him that his brand was about finishing the drive to the marked pin. They urged him not to bail, and several people sent in donations tagged with messages calling him a coward and pressuring him to keep going. He sat in the dark for a long moment, hesitant, before finally saying he would do it for them and continuing slowly down the road, unaware that the path had been officially abandoned since a massive storm had washed it out years earlier. The pressure to perform for strangers is a heavy weight, often pushing people to ignore the very instincts that are meant to keep them alive. A few hundred yards into the woods, the road narrowed sharply at a blind curve, where the outer shoulder had eroded around a collapsed drainage culvert. The deep drop-off was hidden by a thick layer of dead leaves. Owen's headlights caught the edge of the washout only a split second before he reached it. He tried to steer away, but the front wheels slid onto the loose shoulder, which gave way under the weight of the car. The vehicle slid sideways and rolled down a 30-foot embankment, landing upside down in a dry, rocky stream bed. The dashboard camera captured the violent spinning and the sound of crushing metal before the car came to rest. For several more seconds, the live stream remained connected, showing the dim interior of the overturned vehicle, dashboard warning lights flashing, and the sound of Owen struggling to breathe. Then, the already weak cellular signal dropped completely and the stream abruptly disconnected. Viewers assumed it was just another connection dropout, with some joking that he had finally driven into a dead zone. Only later, after investigators reviewed the archived livestream, did people realize the final seconds had shown dashboard warning lights flashing inside the overturned car before the signal disappeared. It's unsettling how easily those last few moments looked like nothing more than another technical problem. Owen survived the initial impact, but he was pinned inside by the collapsed dashboard with both legs trapped, his phone unreachable in the footwell. He had suffered multiple rib fractures that collapsed his left lung, and blood began to slowly fill his chest cavity. Overnight, the temperature dropped to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. He stayed alive in the wreckage for several hours, unable to call for help, before the combined effects of internal bleeding and hypothermia became fatal. A hunter walking through the woods the next afternoon noticed broken tree branches along the embankment and discovered the overturned car. He called for help, and emergency responders arrived shortly after, but there was nothing they could do. It is heartbreaking to realize how many hours he spent in the dark, waiting for someone to find him, never knowing that his audience had already moved on to the next stream. The medical examiner ruled the death accidental, caused by blunt force chest trauma sustained during the rollover, which was then compounded by exposure to the cold. The report noted that the broken ribs had punctured his lung, leading to internal bleeding that would have been survivable had he been rescued within the first hour. The remote location and the lack of cell service meant that help could not reach him in time. The logging road was actually private land land that had been unmaintained for years, despite it appearing on outdated digital map services. Shortly after the incident, the property owner installed a heavy locked gate at the entrance, and mapping companies eventually removed the trail from their public databases. We often trust the technology in our pockets more than our own eyes, and sometimes the blind trust is the last mistake we ever make.